Okay, here we go. We are going through the Bible in a year. We're going at 230 miles an hour, watching the landscape pass us pretty quick. But we're getting the big picture. And now we are into the section known as the prophets. The prophets. And the prophets of the Old Testament are usually divided into two categories. They're divided into the major prophets. They're divided into the minor prophets. The major prophets are major because they're longer. The minor prophets are minor because they're shorter. So it doesn't make any sense that we call it that, but that's what we call it. And the minor prophets, of course, get less press, get much less reading because they're minor prophets. But they're actually much easier to read because they're shorter. And you can maybe figure out a little bit more about what's going on in reading those. So we're also saying that the prophets are not in chronological order. So when you go through the sections of the Bible, the books of the Bible, you go through the law, you go through the history, you go through the poetry, and now you get to the section of the prophets. It's not chronological. In fact, the prophets begin with Isaiah and Jeremiah. Let's do it again. Here's how it goes. It goes Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, and then Jonah. After going through all of those prophets, when we get to Jonah, Jonah is the first prophet chronologically. Now, the interesting thing about Jonah being in the prophets is, I guess he's a prophet. He's being sent by God, and he's being sent to bring the words of God. So that would mean that he's a prophet. He's speaking forth the words of God. But he's really an evangelist. He's an evangelist going to the Assyrians. And the Assyrians, who are they? Well, the Assyrians are an early world governing empire. Now, there's several world governing empires. The fun thing about learning the Bible is you get to learn the history of the world. And so there are several world governing empires. Egypt was one. And now in that area that we know as the Middle East, there's a people that are arising who are becoming very strong, and they're known as the Assyrians. And they would be in the area of Iraq today, Iran, somewhere thereabouts. And so they're growing very powerful, and they're also feared because they're ruthless. They are a tough gang of people, and they conquer. And so people were afraid of the Assyrians. They were known to flay people alive, all kinds of crazy stuff, all kinds of violent stuff. And so people feared just the very name of the Assyrians because these guys were so crazy and so violent in the minds of so many. And of course, that's what they wanted. They wanted to strike that fear into people, and then they would go and conquer these people. So they're a world governing empire. They're ruling over a lot of territory and taking over peoples. And there are many world governing empires, and Assyria is one. You know, we'll see some other ones rise up. We'll see Babylon rise up. We'll see the Persians rise up. We'll see Greece rise up. We'll see Rome rise up. And we'll see all of that when we go through the prophets and we go through some of this other history. But this is Jonah, and Jonah is sent as an evangelist to these Assyrian people. Now, he doesn't want to do it just because of who the Assyrians are and how violent they are and how they're taking over people. And he's like, I don't want to go talk to those people. And God sends him to those people. So whenever you say those people, it's usually a negative connotation on how one group views another group or how one person views another group of people. He didn't want to go. So God called him and he didn't want to go. Well, big story there, right? Maybe God's calling you and you don't want to go. So let's read a little bit about this Jonah, early prophet, first one. He's going to the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians are going to eventually come and attack the northern kingdom of Israel. And they will ultimately be the one that brings down that northern kingdom of Israel, the Assyrians. So it says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. And he said, go to the great city of Nineveh. Now, it's interesting that God would call it a great city. It's 3.5 miles long and maybe 1.5 miles wide. and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. Now, these aren't the Jewish people. This is another nation. And God said that the wickedness of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, has come up to God. And he says, go and preach against them. But Jonah ran away. And we go, oh, why did he run away? Well, we just said why he ran away. The Assyrians were a brutal people. It's very possible that if Jonah goes there to Nineveh to preach against the Ninevites, to preach against Assyria, that they're going to flay him. They're going to cut his skin off in the middle of the town square. So he ran away from the Lord, and he headed to Tarshish, which was probably 400 miles from where he was going to leave from, and 400 miles from Nineveh. Some people say this was Spain. And he went down to Joppa, and he found a ship, and he bound for that port. So he's like, get me out of here. I want to go as far away from here as I can possibly go. I don't want to go to these Assyrians. After paying the fare, he went abroad, and he sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. He's trying to get away from the Lord. Well, where can I go from your presence is what Psalm 139 says. And the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. And all the sailors were afraid, and they cried out to each other in their own gods. So they're crying out to their gods, God help us, God save us. We're going to die here. The ship is falling apart. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten up the ship. Well, it's probably going to be a bad deal by the time they finally land. They don't have any cargo. But Jonah went down below the deck, where he lay down and he went to sleep. Now these guys are all freaking out, and Jonah's going to sleep. And the captain said to him, how can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he'll take notice of us and we won't perish. And then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots and find out who's responsible for this calamity. They were a little superstitious. They're like, somebody must be doing something bad on here. And, who is it? And they cast lots, and it fell on Jonah. And so they asked him, tell us, who's responsible for making all this trouble? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? Who are you? What's your country? What people are you? What's going on? Who are you? Did you bring this trouble upon us? We don't want to die. And he said, I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. I made the God who made this stuff, and he made the dry land, and he's making this stuff happen. This terrified them, and they said, what have you done? What have you done that you're bringing this trouble on us? And they knew he was running away from the Lord, because he had already told them. He told them he was running away from God. And the sea was getting rougher and rougher. And so I asked him, what should we do to make the sea calm down? What do we do? And Jonah said, pick me up and throw me in the sea, and it'll become calm. I know that it's my fault that this storm has come upon you. Kind of interesting principle there, right? That so often our sin, and so often our shortcomings, and so often our actions affect other people. And here, Jonah's disobedience to God is affecting all of the people around him. Conceivably, the same thing happens to us all the time. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land. They were like, we're not going to kill the guy. Let's go back to land. But they couldn't do it because the sea grew even wilder than before. And then they cried out to the Lord. Jonah kind of converts them, where they're now turning to the Lord. They're turning to God. After this, they're turning from their gods, from their idols, to the true and the living God. They cried out to the Lord, and they said, please, Lord, don't let us die for taking this man's life. Don't hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done as you please. And then they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging sea calmed. And at this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. Wow, made some commitments to God. So Jonah, he doesn't want to be effective, and yet he's being effective with these guys. These guys are turning to the Lord because they're seeing what's going on and understanding what's going on, and they cry out to the true and the living God. So there's the first chapter of Jonah. We'll take a little deeper dive and just spend another session in Jonah looking at the whole story. But it's the Assyrians. You see, the Assyrians, the world governing empire of the Assyrians. And what we're going to see is there's going to be different world governing empires that are going to come and rule over the Jewish people. And so here's the Assyrian ones. and he goes there to preach them, but he doesn't want to go preach. He don't want to talk to these people. Hey, so we're going to move on, do some more with the prophets. Hey, bless you guys.